have been was an overall Conservative government. So what did you want, given the way you'd voted? Well, you could have had another election.
Sorry to interrupt you, but one person voting doesn't vote for a coalition.
No, but
one person votes for
David,
a party.
sorry, the fact is that this audience and the wider audience listening represent British democracy. They voted for a certain sort of House of Commons. The issue is whether the politicians listening to and reflecting the reality of what the people had voted for have any cause for betrayal. And the fact of the matter is that Britain faces the most horrendous economic circumstance. And I believe that David Cameron, making a very open, and Melanie would say too open, an offer to the Lib Dems, caught the need of the moment, which was to get a firm, stable government able to cope with the economic difficulties over a full Parliament. That is what...
Michael. With respect, Michael, you're acting as if the financial crisis started on May the 7th. We knew that already. That didn't justify doing this deal. During the election campaign, just to go back to the original question of betrayal, what is a betrayal? When Nick Clegg says a week before election campaign, there is a gulf in values between myself and David Cameron. They have no progressive reform agenda at all, only an unbearable sense of entitlement that it's their time to govern. When he says that, you think, there's a man who doesn't like David Cameron. There's a man who's not going to do a deal with David Cameron. When Sarah Tether campaigns in Brent Central and campaigns against the Labour candidate from the left, she argued from the left and got lots of Labour votes to beat the Labour candidate Dawn Butler. That's a betrayal when her party then backs up the Tory party. When in Norfolk North, Norman Lamb says, vote for me, we'll keep the Tories out, and the Labour vote collapses, the Lib Dem vote goes up and he keeps the seat, and the Lib Dems then jump into government with the Tories, that is a betrayal of all those votes.
Can I just... I mean, this is a wonderful rant, and this is the tradition of the left, and I admire you for getting onto it so quickly.
But you're in bed with the left now, Michael.
There is only one real question.
Yeah.
What would you have had happen?
Very simple answer, and I'll pose it in a question to Simon Hughes.
No. What is the answer?
The answer is, why did you not
simply... That's not an answer.
Well, it is an answer. Let me speak.
No.
Why did the Liberal Democrats not allow the Tories to govern on their own as a minority government?
I'll give you a
just because Labour turned them down, they didn't have to jump into bed for 5 seats.
I will tell you the answer.
And none of them even
because
good cabinet
the
seats.
Tory government would not have lasted 6 months, and the pound would have gone through the floor, and interest rates
the world would have come to an end.
No,
well,
the
Ken
British
Clark told us if we
needs someone to cope with it.
Your friend Ken Clark told us if we have a hung parliament, the IMF will arrive. Where are they? I haven't seen IMF anywhere. You guys have been fear-mongering the whole election campaign.
We have a coalition.
We have a hung parliament.
We have a government.
We were told by Ken Clark a hung parliament. We do have a hung parliament.
We have a coalition government for 5 years.
We have a hung parliament. Now you've got a coalition. You have a governing group with a majority.
We were told that the Conservative Party ran a party election broadcast against a hung parliament party. They said it would give us weak government and a paralysis of the economy.
Let me answer your question.
And Simon Hughes, when you answer, one element of betrayal that many people have talked about is this issue of immigration, your amnesty for illegal immigrants. You've given up that, you've accepted a cap on immigration. Can you include that in your answer?
Yes, I will. Let me deal with the general point that Mehdi asked. We did then have an option. When we reckoned, on the basis of what we were told in the meetings with the Labour Party after the election, that the Labour Party were not going to move on any of the things that I would have expected the Labour Party to move on.
That's just not true.
Well, it is true.
Let him have his say,
It is true,
Mehdi.
and it's a sad indictment of the lack of progressive characteristic of the Labour Party and the strength of the old dinosaurs on the right. When that didn't happen, we then had two choices. We could have allowed a minority Tory government to govern, or we could have gone into coalition. And the reason we didn't, and we weighed up both very carefully, was firstly the reason Michael Heseltine rightly gave. It would not have been in Britain's interest for a minority government to inherit power at this time of economic crisis, worse than any time since the war, environmental crisis and political crisis. Yeah. And it would have meant we would have betrayed our voters far more because we would have left an untrammelled Tory party to govern with no
rubbish.
Really? No, not rubbish at all. There would have been Tory policies, rather than an agreement which has many of our policies. And bluntly, I don't go into politics to be only in opposition. I go into politics to be in power so that I can deliver the things I want. So I can deliver the things I want. The people who elect me in one of the most disadvantaged parts of this country, and I want to take poor people out of tax. I want to make sure children have a better start at schools.
You want to
I want to make sure
you want to
people
have public
go into
spending
jobs.
cuts this year, which you campaigned.
I want to make sure
Melanie
we have
Phillips.
fair public spending.
You
cuts.
said this is nonsense.
Yes,
self-serving.
if I hear another politician talk about the national interest, I think I shall puke. This deal was done between two parties, the Lib Dems and the Conservatives, for one reason alone. Both of them were desperate for power, and both of them were willing to give up things that were precious to each of them because they were so desperate for power.
If you think, Melanie, that 6 months or 9 months of uncertain minority government would have been good for Britain, then I'm surprised at you.
I now want to hear from members of the audience. The woman in green up there on the right, please, then I'll come to you, sir. Yes.
Yes, surely the Liberal Democrats are in an incredible position now of being allowed to actually have some influence over policy and over government for the coming years.
And you approve?
Surely that's I think that's an incredibly positive position to be in.
Yes, the choice was between betrayal or irrelevance. If you hadn't done anything, Liberal Democrats are going to be irrelevant for a long, long time.
And the man up there in the checked shirt.
Yellow. Oh, yeah, OK.
No, the man behind you, isn't it? He's got a more checked shirt than you've got.
So there's plenty of check shirts in the crowd tonight. I have to say, what Simon Hughes is saying is actually to be believed with regards to negotiations with Labour. Labour, the working class people's party, would not back a policy to lift people out of poverty with regards to £10,000 and where you start paying tax.
So you are critical of Labour for not doing a deal with the Liberal Democrats?
Well, Labour should have actually been a bit more responsive to demands in terms of negotiations with the Lib Dems.
And the woman in the centre here, in the fourth row, in black. Yes.
Yeah, it's quite obvious that both the parties just dropped all the policies that they made promises during the election campaign.
That's not true.
What about Trident and tuition fees? All these things have now been thrown out the window as soon as you got close to power.
Now, can I just deal with those two very quickly, because they're both very important policies. In relation to Trident, the commitment is to make sure for the next Parliament that we remain a country with Trident. That was always going to be the case because it has a life much longer than the next Parliament, but that the cost of Trident is now going to be looked at as part of the financial review.
But you wouldn't deny that you've given up a lot of things that were in your manifesto.
No, we've given up
I mentioned immigration.
We've given up some things, of course we have. Because
you've given up opposition to nuclear power, apparently now a liberal...
This year,
no, we haven't
biggest
given
issue
up.
of all.
No, we haven't.
And you've given up, given up a commitment... Yes, exactly.
David, we haven't given up opposition to nuclear power. We specifically have retained that in the document.
But you've agreed that the plans for nuclear power to be introduced should now go ahead.
No, we've agreed...
That's what your agreement says.
No, I've got it here. I know exactly what it says.
Christian's made a statement today saying that as long as it's not public money, it can go ahead.
And who gave the better guarantee that there would be no public subsidy for nuclear power? It was the Tories, not the Labour
So
Party.
You're dead happy, really, with everything
that's happened? I'm not dead happy, but it's a compromise because, in the interests of trying to get a stable government, you have to sometimes make compromises.
The man in the red T-shirt up there at the back, on the left.
I didn't expect to come here and agree with Melanie Phillips, but I think she's absolutely right. There's been an awful lot of talk about acting in the national interest and new politics, and in fact I think what we've seen is an example of politicians acting in old politics and purely out of self-interest.
OK, and the person up there on the right, on the gangway, yes.
I feel the Lib Dems have just realised that Nick Clegg only wanted power, and that's why he's Deputy Prime Minister, and that's the reason that he went into coalition with the Tories.
You think that was his motive? OK, and I'll take... you, sir, there in the middle. Yes, you.
I think the Labour Party have actually snatched victory from the jaws of defeat by avoiding this coalition. Purposefully.
We've got a point on that. We'll come to later. Michael Heseltine, yes.
Well, I think that there are many people in my party who would think that the narrow self-interest of the Conservative Party was to try to go it alone and to have a general election in October, having had a budget which was more acceptable than the Labour Party might have thought. That would have been a perfectly viable strategy, but it would not have been a long-term strategy, and it would have been dangerous to the economy. So you can all this stuff about concessions. Let's not mince our language. Of course there have been concessions, but the issue that you, the masters of democracy, have to face is this: do you want a firm government, or do you want the uncertainties that you created in the way you voted? And the only way, could you just give a minute? The only way you can conceivably get a firm government is if both Conservative and Liberal make concessions. That is what they've done, and that is the position you put them into, from which there was no escape.
Well, I'm very much enjoying this defence, and I'm glad you're both sitting together. I'm wondering how long the BBC are going to invite two parties on. I don't know why they're both here. But just very quickly, you say... No, let me finish.